The brutal play is initially a carte blanche given to me by Hubert Bonnet, the director, founder of the Fondation CAB in Brussels. He asked me to propose an idea, and I had this concept in mind for a while. The idea that minimal art previously existed during the constructivist era and still had echoes today. But I wanted to put an emphasis on the material qualities, especially on the raw materials. This exhibition turned around the house, La Maison Démontable, the demountable house by Jean Prouvé, which is basically the core of a series of exhibitions that happened here at the Fondation CAB. My exhibition is closing this series of exhibitions. And I wanted this program to include the house of Jean Prouvé because simply initially elements of houses by Jean Prouvé were part of the exhibition I proposed. So having the whole house was really convenient because everything in this house is made about raw materials, raw wood, metal, that really correspond to the logic of the exhibition. That was absolutely perfect. I gathered 10 artists from various generations, from Rodchenko, whose work were created 1920, 1921, until Ramon Feller, whose work was basically made for the show. He's the youngest artist here. And in between, you have artists like Robert Morris, you have Donald Judd, you have Carl Andre, Charlotte Posenenske. In the name I've given to this exhibition, the brutal play, there is of course a reference to brutalist architecture. The term was coined by Le Corbusier himself to qualify raw concrete buildings, and of course a kind of roughness of these shapes, avoiding any decorum, any useless elements, getting rid of ornament, but also painting like the mask that is usually covering the raw materials that architecture is made of. Rodchenko, for example, wanted to see how these elements could resonate with architecture, with other fields of creation. But most of all, they wanted their work to be concept more than precious objects. Someone like Tatlin said, I want to use real materials in real space. That's why they got rid about all the precious elements that you were usually finding in sculpture. I don't know, marble, bronze, gold. They were basically getting rid of this to come back to the essence, the structure of what is a volume in space. So all the sculpture here basically refuse painting, refuse the mask of appearance. They appear the way they are done. And I went even further, inviting artists that are basically peeling off the surface of things. For example, Kilian Ruytemann literally peeled a wall with a metal hook to reveal the layers beneath the white cube. So you have a rough diagonal that is basically echoing, of course, Lucio Fontana. Here, Ruytemann will basically do that using this very old idea that sculpture is made per via di levare, by way of taking the matter away. I'm quoting Leonardo da Vinci. It's one of the most ancient definitions of sculpture. This logic will reveal the structure behind. For example, Carsten Födinger will use the metal poles that usually serve as a kind of a skeleton to host the skin, the body of concrete that will be cast onto them. So it's revealing what is usually hidden behind. it blocks basically the enter of the exhibitions. You have to walk on the side to enter the show. The structure that holds the architectural elements is basically deprived from its skin, so you can see through it. The idea of structure is very strong with artists like Carl Andre. He is basically using pillars of raw wood that is just bringing together to form a huge square on the ground, weighing tons, and basically is a concentration of very simple elements that will create something very strong, very repetitive, avoiding usual compositions. It's only little squares together designing a square, but in volume this time, not on the floor as we usually know works by Carl Andre. I invited Robert Morris to collaborate with the exhibition as well, and we decided to include a work called Roman Arch that is a Roman arch but made out of wood blocks. This kind of work brings a very interesting presence in the show. It will create a play around it, a force field again, that will basically push spectators to pay attention to their distance toward the work. That equilibrium seems pretty fragile. No one would dare to pass underneath. So that's very interesting, the tension that such a sculpture is able to create in its surroundings. For this kind of artist, like for Charlotte Posenenske, the void is as important as the matter itself. That's all the paradox of this brutal play exhibition. The dynamic of it is that these artists are very preoccupied by the raw qualities of the materials, but they are as well really taking care of the empty space. So the play that it is about in the title is the free choreography, the free behavior that is open to spectators. This idea of a sculpture that is not closed on itself, that basically lets the gaze circulate through it, that let us see what is behind it, is basically in germs in the sculptures gathered here by Rodchenko. Alexander Rodchenko initiated minimal art just by assembling identical, very simple elements together according to combinations, very simple as well. And they were really observed in the late 1950s, early 1960s by the whole minimal scene in New York, for example. This connection is very important, but the other connection with the contemporary artists of younger generations is very important too, because those artists have been looking at minimal art, they've been looking at constructivism, they've been looking at modernist logics. So, for example, someone like Émilie Ding, another Swiss artist, I invite her to show her a work made out of felt that is hanged onto a metal bar to the wall. The surface of felt is burnt by a flamethrower, so there is no pigment. The form is basically born by taking the matter away, by burning and damaging the surface. And the result is absolutely not chaotic, it's very ordered and very minimal as well, rendering an homage to the heroes of the 1960s. Of course, the use of felt will remind visitors about Robert Morris' own work with this material. An artist like Ramon Feller has created a V of cast concrete on the floor that is equipped with two huge wires. The artist started the motor on the first day of the opening. and he will turn off the motor on the last minute of the exhibition. So during almost 3 months and a half, something, this work is gonna self-destroy. It's gonna break the concrete that it is made of. And the V of victory that you can find on the floor will slowly fade away, slowly collapse on itself. Another time-based sculpture is the sarcophagus by Kilian Ruytemann that basically plays with entropy. It's a big piece of foam and it will slowly degrade itself. Rain will fall into it and basically will corrode the aspect of the sculpture. So it's about architecture, it's about sculpture, but it's too about revealing the fragileness of all these brutal things. Someone like Charlotte Posenenske gave the curators, the collectors, the possibility of playing with a series of very simple modules that were usually used as heating or air conditioning elements. Those elements, you can combine them to create a work that will never be something that she never thought about. It will enter the possibility, the area of play that she defined mostly in the late 60s. Here I thought a very minimal one, standing on the wall, like a defunctionalized heating system. But in the house of Prouvé, I created a structure that reminds of cryptozoology. It could be a chimera. Visitors can enter the house, can see through Posenenske sculptures, and can of course have points of observation around them. So it's all again about the capacity of the body of the visitors to explore its surroundings. Another important work is simply a hole cut into a wall by Kilian Ruytemann. It looks like a tunnel on the floor, but the way it works with the space is very interesting. From one side you have a black half hole on a white room, and if you go in the room behind, that is usually a room made for projecting movies, left in the dark, that will offer the counterpoint. You will see the light entering the half hole into a dark environment. Most of the brain is fully satisfied by image. Just look at the time we spend in front of our phones, in front of computers, in front of screens, in front of image. So I think the necessity today, curating an exhibition such as this one, is to provide the spectators something that couldn't hardly be emulated, especially since all these shapes reveal complexity in the detail further than their very simple geometric appearance. So I wanted to present an exhibition with works that has to be experimented in real time and space, to basically provide a kind of shelter from the image. And I still believe that's one of the great powers of abstraction, because everything here is abstract. It goes into, 3-dimension installations, but it's mostly abstract.